In August 2019, Claire sat in the attic of her late mother's house in upstate New York. Dusty light filtered through a small window, and the air smelled faintly of old books and dried herbs. Her mother had passed away 3 weeks earlier, and Claire was slowly, almost reluctantly, sorting through boxes of her belongings, Christmas ornaments, old letters, yellowed newspapers. At the bottom of one box, she noticed a photo album bound in dark brown leather. The cover was cracked, the edges worn. When she opened it, Claire froze. A young woman in a white wedding dress. Her face was gentle, slightly shy, her eyes staring directly into the camera. Beside her, an empty space. No groom. No guests. Not even a shadow of another person in the frame. On the back of the photograph, in neat feminine handwriting, it read, August 12, 1978. Harrow's Creek. Claire had never heard of this town. Her mother had never mentioned living there, let alone getting married. And, most unsettling of all, Claire knew nothing about her father. From that moment on, the question "who was he?" stopped being mere curiosity. It became an obsession. The drive to Harrow's Creek took 4 hours. Claire cruised with the windows down, a local station murmuring about a church picnic between airings of landslide. The closer she got, the more it felt like time here had tapped the brakes and forgotten to signal. Main Street was 2 blocks of faded storefronts. A pharmacy, a pawn shop, a barbershop pole turning so slowly it looked tired. Claire parked by Midge's Diner. Inside smelled like coffee, hot oil, and something citrus, as if orange zest had fallen into the fryer. "You're not from around here," the waitress said, solid woman, glasses on a chain. "Your eyes are looking. We haven't lost anything in a while." "I'm looking for Harrow's Creek Studio." "A photographer named John Branson," Claire said. A fork squealed on a plate near the window. The waitress hesitated. "Studio's been shut 30 years. Branson, still alive. Nursing home off Highway 17. But if you need a wedding album, honey, Walmart's cheaper." Claire showed the photo. The diner went oddly quiet. The old man by the window stared at the glass, like he was trying to see someone over her shoulder. "That's the place," he said without turning. "Veterans Hall." They pulled the sign when the roof started to sag. And, he trailed off, then exhaled. "I heard the wedding march that day. Only saw the bride." At the county records office, diplomas shared wall space with a home-printed poster, "Smile, you're in Harrow's Creek." The clerk wore professional fatigue like a uniform. "Summer of 78? She repeated. "Power surge in 85 cooked part of the archive. We've got indices, and they're blank. For your date, nothing." "Nothing at all? No names, no licenses?" Claire's palms were damp. "Weather, rats, human error. In old towns, gaps are normal," the clerk said, smiling too quickly. "Try the photographer." Branson's studio was a brick building with its windows boarded. One plank was crooked, left a gap. Claire lifted her phone and peered in. A dusty tripod, a cash register, a rack of frames. On the floor, a box of black and white contact sheets, scattered like dominoes. She reached through, snagged the top sheet. On the back, a stamp, Branson, 1978, HC12. HC12. Harrow's Creek, the 12th? Or a series? She snapped a photo of the stamp. An engine rattled outside. Claire flinched and looked out in time to see a bluish El Camino idle at the curb. The driver wore a camo cap. He didn't get out. He just watched, like he was waiting for her to blink. The nursing home was called Cedar Pines. Branson lay on his side, thin as a dried root. When Claire showed him the picture, he turned his head slowly, like someone replayed him on old film. "Her name was Emily," he said, as if the name might open a door. "I took 3 shots. In the first, her veil trembled. In the second, he stopped. In the second, someone stood beside her. And later, he wasn't there." "Removed? Airbrushed?" Claire leaned in. They said there was no wedding. There was no bride. Took the film. But one contact sheet stayed. He lifted a hand, light as a wire. I hid it in a frame at the studio, behind the fisherman photo. If the frame's still there. The door cracked open. A young orderly with a flawless smile peered in. Everything okay, Mr. Branson? Fine, the old man said, but his fingers gripped Claire's hand. They check sometimes, he whispered. Ask if the daughter has come. Claire jerked her hand away. In the parking lot, the El Camino idled near the exit, a shadow pretending it was just an absence of light. Her phone buzzed. Unknown caller. She answered. Claire, a man said. Quiet as footsteps on carpet. Return the photograph. Don't become like her. Who are you? She asked. And who was he? Silence. Then a click, and a wedding march played softly, backward. You're close, the voice said. Look at the edge of her veil. The line died. Claire pulled up the photo again. Along the veil's edge, where lace fell into empty space, a thin embroidery ran like a thread. What she'd taken for random stitches resolved into two tiny symbols, an oak leaf, and a small key. And they matched nothing she'd ever known. That evening, Claire went back to the boarded-up studio. She knew it was reckless, breaking into an abandoned building in a strange town, with that same El Camino shadowing her, but Branson's words about the fisherman frame itched in her mind like a splinter she couldn't dig out. She pried the board loose with her pocketknife. Inside, the silence felt foreign, as if the building was breathing in sync with her steps. On the wall, among dusty portraits of graduates and wedding couples, hung the photo of a man holding an enormous fish. The wooden frame was heavier than it should have been. On the back, a sliding panel held by a tiny screw. She loosened it with a coin. Inside lay a contact sheet, 12 small frames from the same day as her mother's wedding photo. In the second frame, a man in a dark suit stood beside the bride. His face, strange. The eyes were in perfect focus, but everything else was blurred. And the eyes were staring straight into the lens. She pulled out her phone to photograph it when she heard the soft creak of floorboards behind her. Claire spun around. In the doorway stood the man in the camo cap. Nothing in his hands. No expression on his face. He just looked at her. You should leave, he said quietly. It's dangerous to keep memories here. Who is he? Claire pointed at the frame. Was he my father? The man slowly shook his head. He was someone who shouldn't be named. Not here. Especially not here. Without another word, he turned and walked into the night. Claire ran after him, empty street. No car. No footsteps. As if he'd vanished into the air. Her phone buzzed. On the screen, a photo, the same contact sheet, but every frame except the first had been blacked out with paint. Caption, only look at her. Claire decided not to spend another night in Harrow's Creek. The Pine Rest Motel looked like no one had changed the carpet since 1979. But exhaustion outweighed disgust. She checked in, slid the bolt, and sat on the edge of the bed, holding the contact sheet. The image of the man in the suit wouldn't leave her mind. Those eyes, too sharp, as if he hadn't just looked at her through the camera, but was still looking, right now, through time. She opened her laptop, connected her phone, and zoomed in. In the reflection of the pupil, something emerged, looked like a window, or the crosshairs of a scope. Outside, a car door slammed. Claire glanced at the motel window. In the parking lot sat the El Camino, headlights off. Inside, a silhouette. Motionless. Part of her screamed to leave. But the other part, the stubborn one, whispered, if you run, the answers run too. She stepped out, keys in her pocket. The air was thick, sticky. When she reached the car, it was empty. On the driver's seat lay an unmarked envelope. Inside, a small piece of lace, identical to her mother's veil. And a brass key, engraved with an oak leaf. The motel phone rang. "Claire," the same voice said. "The key opens a box better left closed. But now, it's too late." "Where is the box?" she asked. Click. Silence. She went back outside. The El Camino was gone. In the morning, she returned to the studio, only to find the board she'd moved now nailed tight with fresh nails. Through the crack, the fisherman frame was still visible, but the glass now covered black fabric. At the records office, she learned of an old bank vault in town, long abandoned. It sat in the basement of the old Veterans Hall. The building was boarded up, but one basement window, half buried in dirt, had a broken grate. Claire slipped inside, flashlight clenched between her teeth. The air reeked of damp and rust. In the far corner, a safe with a faded oak leaf emblem. The key slid in perfectly. Inside lay only one item, a worn envelope. On it, handwritten, "If this isn't Emily, close it and leave." Claire opened it. Inside, a second photograph. The same scene as her mother's wedding photo, only now the groom was beside her. His face was completely covered with gray duct tape. On the back, it read, "He's still here." Claire emerged from the basement of the Veterans Hall, clutching the envelope. The street was empty, but the air felt thicker than usual, as if someone waited around every corner. She was halfway to her car when she heard a faint click. Not loud, just the distinct sound of an old camera shutter. Claire whipped around. Nothing. Inside her car, she locked the doors and set the envelope on the passenger seat. But as she slid the key into the ignition, something in the rearview mirror froze her. In the shadows behind the building, a figure stood. A black silhouette. And the glint of a lens at face level. She gunned the engine, leaving Harrow's Creek behind. The road wound through the forest, fog growing thicker with every mile. Her headlights turned into pale clouds that could hide anything. On the second bend, headlights appeared in the fog behind her. The car kept the same distance, never passing, never falling back. Claire's heart pounded as she reached for her phone. But then she saw it, something metallic in the beam. The car behind her dipped forward. They'd opened the trunk while driving. A second later, something hit the pavement with a shriek. Claire swerved to avoid it, and realized it was an old picture frame, lying face down. She didn't stop. The fog suddenly broke, revealing a railroad crossing. The barrier was down, but no train in sight. Behind her, headlights drew closer. Claire yanked the handbrake, spun the car 180 degrees, and sped back toward town. The roar of the pursuing engine grew louder. At the first intersection, she darted right and spotted an abandoned auto shop. The bay doors were ajar. Claire slipped inside, killed the engine, and hid between two lift platforms. Headlights passed by, not slowing. She exhaled, but only for a moment. In the gloom, something glinted. A lens. And the faint click of a shutter. "You weren't supposed to see his face," a man's voice said from the dark. "Now they'll want you to become part of the picture." "Who are you?" Claire stepped back, feeling cold metal under her heel, a wrench left on the floor. "Just someone who once looked at that photo," the voice was low, raspy. "And realized the bride isn't smiling. She's warning." A man in his 50s emerged from the dark, wearing a leather jacket. Gaunt face, sharp cheekbones, eyes alert like he'd learned to spot danger before it showed itself. "Who are they?" Claire asked. He came closer, leaning on the lift post. "People who never leave traces. The ones who aren't in the pictures, but are always in them. Your mother crossed their path. And that man in the suit, he's not your father. He was their guide." "Guide to where?" "Not where. To whom?" He pulled an old worn wallet and took out a small card with a faded oak leaf emblem. "See? That's their mark. Your mother wore it on her wedding day, without knowing what it meant." Claire thought of the brass key and the lace from her mother's veil. "Why are you following me?" "To make sure you don't make her mistake. They always lure you through memories." Photographs are their doorway. But now the door's open, and you're already inside. He tossed a small envelope onto the floor. There's an address in here. Go there, and you'll see what she tried to hide. But Claire, he leaned in, if you see his eyes, look away. When she picked up the envelope, the man was gone. The address led to the edge of Harrow's Creek, to a boarded-up house. On the porch, a mailbox carved with an oak leaf. Inside smelled of damp wood and old film. The living room walls were covered in photographs. All weddings. Brides, grooms, guests, but in every picture, one detail was the same, in mirrors, windows, or champagne glasses, the reflection of the same man in a dark suit. Claire found an album on the table. On the first page, her mother's wedding. And the man in the suit, eyes seeming to follow her every move. Beneath it, handwritten, he's still watching. The photographs covered the walls from floor to ceiling. Claire walked along them, scanning the reflections of the man in the dark suit. Sometimes he stood beside the bride, sometimes behind a groomsman, sometimes deep in the hall's shadows. But the longer she looked, the more she realized, the eyes in each photo were slightly different. In some, they looked straight into the camera, in others, off to the side, and in one, directly at her. She stepped closer to that frame. In the reflection of the windowpane behind the groom, a shadow moved. Claire turned. The room was empty. But on the floor lay a piece of old lace, same as the one left for her at the motel, only longer. Behind her came a soft voice. You're looking for answers, but you'll forget the question. Claire spun. In the living room doorway stood the man from the photos. Dark suit, white shirt, tie. His face, alive, yet too smooth, as if the wrinkles had been erased and the shadows on his cheekbones painted on. Who are you? Her voice wavered. I am what's left after promises, he said. And your mother knew I'd return. He stepped closer. The floorboards didn't creak. Claire instinctively pulled out her phone and turned on the camera. On the screen, he stood exactly where he was, but when she blinked, the image on the phone was gone. Why were you at her wedding? She asked. It was my wedding, he smiled. She just left before the vows. His hand brushed the table, one of the albums flipped open, its pages rustling, turning on their own. On every photo now was her, Claire, in a wedding dress, with an empty space beside her. I've been waiting for you, he said. All that's left is the first shot. He raised the camera. The flash blinded her. When her vision cleared, the room was empty. On the floor lay the album, open to a page with her face. At the bottom, handwritten, August 12, 2019. Harrow's Creek. Claire left Harrow's Creek before dawn. The drive back to Albany felt endless, but every mile brought relief, as if distance could erase what she'd seen. At home, the first thing she did was pull out every photo, the key, the lace. She dumped them into a metal basin and lit a match. Flames devoured the paper, leaving nothing but ash where the suited faces had been. She exhaled. That evening, heading to the kitchen for water, Claire noticed a photo under a magnet on the fridge. Black and white. She was asleep in her own bed. At the headboard, an empty space. She yanked it down, tore it in half. On the back, still looking at me. She checked the doors, locked. Windows, shut. That night, she woke to the sound of a camera shutter. Heavy, distant. She grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the hall. At the far end, near a mirror, something dark flickered. Claire rushed toward it, and saw in the reflection not herself, but the room from the Harrow's Creek house. The man in the suit stood behind her shoulder, staring straight into the mirror. She stumbled back, fell, the flashlight rolling away. When she looked up again, the mirror was empty. In the morning, Claire decided to remove every mirror from the house. On the back of one, she found an old photo taped to the frame, a wedding hall full of guests. Every face was covered in gray tape. Except one, the groom's. Her phone rang. The voice she knew instantly. You think distance will save you? I was at your wedding, Claire. You just haven't remembered it yet. Claire spent the day eliminating anything that could serve as a reflection. Mirrors, glass tables, even the shiny lids of kitchen appliances, everything wrapped in old sheets and hauled to the basement. But that evening, in the hallway, a photo album hung on the wall. She hadn't put it there. It was open to a page where she stood in a wedding dress. Beside her, an empty space. On the next page, the space wasn't empty anymore. He stood there, holding her hand. She slammed the album shut, but heard the familiar click, somewhere close. Enough, she shouted into the emptiness. What do you want? The voice came from behind, calm, almost gentle. Only for you to remember. She turned, and was suddenly in a hall she didn't recognize. Long rows of chairs, flowers, warm lamplight. She wore a wedding dress. In her hands, a bouquet she'd never held. Guests sat in silence, their faces hidden by heavy blurs, like ruined film. At the altar stood him. Welcome back, he said, offering his hand. We'll start where she left off. Claire stepped back, but behind her wasn't an aisle anymore, it was a white wall with a massive photograph. It was her, and him. Their faces covered in shadow, but the shadow breathed. This is a dream, she whispered. No. This is what you forgot, he stepped forward. We all forget, Claire. But photographs remember. She lunged sideways, but the floor beneath her cracked like brittle film stock. Everything around her began to split, like a photograph someone was tearing apart. At the last second, she spotted a brass key with an oak leaf lying on the floor. She grabbed it, and fell into darkness. Claire woke in darkness. Rough concrete under her palms, the smell of dust and old paper. Slowly, like an image developing, shapes emerged. She was in a basement, but not her own. In front of her stood a wooden chest with an oak leaf burned into the lid. The key in her hand was cold. She slid it into the lock. A click, and the lid opened. Inside was a flat box of film reels and an envelope. On the envelope, for Claire, when she remembers. She opened it. The letter was in her mother's handwriting. Asterisk dear, if you're reading this, it means he's found you. His name doesn't matter, he's had many. To me, he was simply the groom. I met him when I came to Harrow's Creek to work at the hotel. He knew how to appear at celebrations as if invited, always beside those who were about to disappear. On my wedding day, he asked me to leave with him. I said no, and from that moment, he waited for the next bride. Now, it's you. Photographs are his way. He lives in them as long as someone is looking. Don't look, Claire. Don't open albums. Don't keep pictures. And remember, the key only opens what's already inside you. Asterisk. Claire put the letter back and pulled out one of the reels. On the film, weddings, dozens of them. Faces she'd seen on the photographs in that house. And in each one, the groom. A faint creak behind her. She turned, and saw a mirror in the basement corner. In the reflection, him, in a suit, reaching out his hand. Your turn now, he said. The camera's flash blinded her. When her vision returned, she was standing in sunlight, on her own porch. In her hands, a bouquet. Before her, guests, their faces blurred. And in the crowd, front row, the man in the dark suit, smiling as if this was their shared photograph.